Murnane-O'Connor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Taoiseach, I'd like to speak about the CDNTs in Carlow, and I suppose the biggest issue that I have and had for the last few months is the lack of occupational therapists, speech and language, children that are waiting to be assessed. There is no one to assess them. Children that should be going into classrooms now, into schools in September coming, don't have a place because they are not assessed and they don't know where they're going to school. There is huge issues. It's the same with the ASD classes. The amount of schools that have come to me that are actually looking to try and get these classes, there's huge issues within the department. There's waiting lists. I beg you, Taoiseach, this is going to become a crisis if we do not get more speech and language therapists, more occupational therapists, and we need to build more ASD classes urgently.
I'm conscious that quite a number of deputies raised CAMs and also CDNTs, and I don't have information broken to local level or county level. What I can say is that CAMs receives dedicated funding of approximately 146 million annually, and 110 million of that has been provided to community-based mental health organisations and NGOs this year. And a further 10 million was announced in January for mental health, including the clinical programmes and youth mental health. In collaboration with local CAM services, a waiting list initiative is now underway in 6 areas, specifically focusing where children and young people have waited longer than 9 months. The HSE is also receiving funding under the Sláintecare Integration Innovation Fund to progress a multi-phase quality improvement project to manage CAM's waiting lists. For the first time in the history of the state, we now have a dedicated national office for youth mental health, which will provide leadership, operational oversight and management of all service provision and improvements. And both a new HSE national clinical lead for youth mental health and a new assistant national director for child and youth mental health have recently taken up post. And immediate priorities are to improve access to CAMs and reduce waiting lists. In relation to CAMs and also therapists, which Deputy Dillon raised specifically, our understanding is that private sector capacity does exist, but it is quite limited, and CHOs can now use private sector therapists for those who are waiting the longest, ensuring they are prioritised. In relation to children's disability services, I want to acknowledge the difficulty in meeting demand for these services, and we're very much aware of how this impacts on children and on their families. The PDS Roadmap for Service Improvement was launched last year and is a targeted service improvement programme to achieve quality, accessible, equitable and timely services for children with complex needs. For recruitment and retention, in January of this year, the HSE, working with lead agencies, launched a high-profile recruitment campaign for dietitians, OTs, physiotherapists, psychologists, social workers and speech and language therapists. The campaign recently closed and approximately 495 applications were received, and interviews are due to begin in the coming months. Other initiatives include student sponsorship programmes, therapy assistance to help professionals in providing services, and also marketing CDNTs as a workplace of choice and a good place to work. Just want to recognise Deputy Sullivan and Deputy McAuliffe again for raising issues around rare diseases and orphan medicines. I'm not familiar with the particular medicine in relation to EB, but I will look into it and come back to the deputies directly. As Deputy Boyd Barrett said, housekeepers and cleaners do essential work in our hospitals, particularly in relation to infection control. I'm not familiar with the issue of the appeal on the job spec, but if the deputy wants to pass on some more information to me, I'll make sure he gets a proper reply. On insurance, I'm advised that the average business or the average community service pays less than €5,000 a year for insurance, but obviously that varies from business to business, from service to service and from risk to risk, and it can depend on the different circumstances that may arise. Deputy Murnane-O'Connor, on the important issue that he raised, and I'm glad that the decision to restrict some of those services and payments was reversed very quickly. Certainly once the political system became aware of it, it was reversed very quickly. But I will pass on what he said to Minister Donnelly. The idea here is to standardise what's provided across the country. Standardisation is a good thing, but it has to be done right. And certainly, I think all of us in the House would take the view that if we're standardising services and provision like this across the country, it should be standardised upwards, not just the average of whatever is provided around the country. And then Deputy Barry raised the really important issue of eating disorders, which are far, far too common in this country. and the services are far, far too sparse. And from what he said to me here, I think the 4 demands seem reasonable. Easier said than done, though, as is often the case, particularly given the labour shortages that we face. But I'll certainly take them up with Mr Donnelly and see if we can respond to them as soon as possible.